Sound Off is a public interest forum that encourages your voice to be heard on the topics and issues impacting our local communities. For the next 30 minutes, we invite you to be part of the conversation by calling 219-362-0522. And you can now text your questions to the Liquor Vault on-air line or by email to soundoff@967theeagle.com. This is a topic-based program, and we ask that you keep your comments brief, concise, and related to the topic being discussed. The views expressed on Sound Off are those of the host or callers and do not represent the opinion of 96.7 The Eagle, Spoon River Media LLC, or the sponsors. The Liquor Vault on-air line is now open for your calls or texts at 219-362-0522. This is Sound Off on 96.7 The Eagle.
Hello, friends. Welcome to Sound Off. My name is Nate Laux. It's good to have you with us. I'm back from a quick vacation. Went down to Tennessee for a couple days with my family. And I got to ask this question. Why is gas cheaper everywhere else other than Indiana? We went across the border into Ohio, then to Kentucky, then to Tennessee, and it's like $1 cheaper everywhere else. I don't know what's going on. I will continue to blame Tom Dermody for most of that. So I want to thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Dennis Siddell and Mayor Tom Dermody for taking the show last Friday and for getting the chance to ask and answer all those questions you have about the city of LaPorte. Now we're back to some election shows. We got a little less than 2 weeks left until the election. Some of you have already probably voted and you've already taken care of that, but some of you are still trying to decide who to vote for in this upcoming election. Maybe you're voting straight ticket, maybe you're not, maybe you're like me and you vote for the people. And if you are, you need to probably educate yourself on who's on your ballot. So today we're continuing our campaign to introduce you to some more candidates who might be on your ballot. Now today we've got Republican Jeff Larson, who's a candidate for Indiana State Senate District 4. If you have a question, don't call. Just text me, 219-362-0522, or email me at soundoff@967theeagle.com. I'd love to ask that question for you if you have it. Again, we're not taking calls right now because we want to give the candidate enough time and as much time to answer the questions as possible so that you can learn more about them. So again, Republican Jeff Larson, candidate for Indiana State Senate, Indiana District 4. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Very good. Thanks for having me. I'd like to thank the Eagle for having me today and giving me the opportunity to speak to the voters.
Yeah, it's good to have you. So you have a little bit of political experience. You were, I think, Porter County Council for a little while, but this is your first foray into state politics, I think. Why did you decide to run?
There's several reasons. We did a lot on the council when I was there and invested a lot of money that the county had sitting dormant. And we were really thrifty with the financial end of things. So the Senate seems like a great fit for me because it is the financial arm of the government. The legislation has a lot to do with budgeting. And since we were so successful in Porter County, I thought, I could take that to the state level. We're all complaining about the economics of things right now and inflation. And I think working together, we can solve a lot of those problems for the state. You had remarked about gas and the gas tax and the expense. I mean, we are in a state where we have one of the largest refineries in the country. It is a question all the time, why do we have such high gas costs? And I think there's a lot to do with the amount of taxes that are put on every gallon of gas that we sell.
So do you think that the state needs to rescind some of those taxes?
Well, I think currently the taxes are, and that's a good question for a lot of the senators that are already there. And of course, I'm not in the seat yet, but also the representatives. And I have several friends that are down there. And the reality of what the taxes are currently used for is it's for highway road improvement. It's precisely that. There's nothing else that comes out of those gas taxes. It's almost 100% spent on that, improving roads. So I think currently we are way behind in our road improvement. I think past governing bodies haven't spent a lot on bridges, on roadways, and I think we're seeing that we're having to make that up now. So I know we have quite a bit of an overage downstate, and a lot of that money is geared towards education and a lot of other things that are going to change in the next few years. But I'd like to continue the path. I know it's kind of hard on our pocketbook right now, and I know we rescinded a little bit of the tax. But once you take that tax off, it's very hard to get it back on there.
All right, good to have you here on the show. If you've got a question, the Liquor Vault on-air line can be texted today at 219-362-0522. If you want to text me, I'd love to hear from you. Again, you can email me as well at soundoff@967theeagle.com. We've got Jeff Larson, Republican candidate for Indiana District 4. If you are in the western part of the county, He's going to be your candidate if you're a Republican in that part of the county. Obviously, we've got a couple different state senators. Mike Pachacek is in much of the other county, but he is not up for re-election this year. So some questions coming in for you. As an educator, we need more money and resources in Indiana public schools, but that money won't come unless the legislature agrees to give more to public education. Do you support increasing education budgets to help us compete with other states?
Absolutely do. As a former teacher, Duneland had a referendum come up, and I went 8 years without an increase in salary, so I know what it's like to be held back on that end of the spectrum. There are some bills currently facing the Senate that will do some increases in education, and we've added $300 million in educational resources already, but I think there's a lot more that can be done, and I think that's a perspective that I bring that none of the other legislators currently have, and that is that I have an education background of almost 20 years in the field. I do think that we have a brain drain in Indiana, and we need to prepare more teachers, especially in the center part of the state. We're just not getting people recruited, and that transfers over to funding. Can we fund secondary education? Can we fund programs that will help teachers or help people choose teaching as a path? I think right now education is looked down on. There's so many variables that probably just detract from what could happen in education, and we need to probably look at education and give it a little bit of a boost from the parent perspective and morale perspective also. I think it's a problem to tell somebody, hey, enter education, and then get beat up every day in the classroom.
So there are some legislators and some people in different parts of the state, as pretty much every part of the state is dealing with teacher shortages. It's an American problem, not just a Hoosier problem. Indiana has decided to go with this. If you've got a certain amount of hours spent professionally in a career, you could get essentially an emergency teaching license to be able to teach without a teaching degree, without a degree at all. Some teachers unions, some teachers have said that, again, that time in education, that time learning about how to teach, that time in teaching methods is very important. Do you think this is a good idea? Do you think, again, there's a better solution than the one that we went for?
Well, I think that's a twofold question. The first answer would be, it's difficult to say whether a person is a valuable or a valued educator, even if they have educational background. Teaching is more about caring for the child than anything, and being present in the classroom. We can have teachers that show up that have had all the experience in schooling in the educational field and not be effective teachers, and we can have people that come off the street and become very effective teachers. If we look back a couple decades, a CTE, vocational teaching, which is a large part of my background, doesn't require an educational degree because you have massive amounts of experience in that field. And so I'm sure there are opportunities for people that walk in off the street that have practical applications like business degrees, CPAs, that could be very efficient and effective teachers in, say, mathematics or business classes. Is it right to skip past those teachers that have that educational background, have earned the degree? Absolutely not. But from my point of view, there's going to be a combination of both, and that's going to help the teacher shortages. I don't think we overload one way or the other, and I think we have to look at what the classes are that those people are qualified to teach in. But I believe there's definitely an asset there that we're not utilizing.
We've got Jeff Larson, Republican candidate for Indiana State Senate District 4. Again, if you're in Porter County, our listeners in Porter County, and those in, or much of Porter County anyway, and those in Western LaPorte County, he is on your ballot, as well as his opponent, Democratic incumbent Ronnie Pohl Jr., who was on the show, I think, last week. If you've got a question, you can text me at the Liquor Vault on-air line at 219-362-0522 or email me at soundoff@967theeagle.com. So on this show, we've had a lot of different conversations over the years. We try to track what our legislators doing while in session, these kind of things. One of the issues that we hear a lot from our listeners about is marijuana legalization. We know here, being a border, we're bordering Michigan. We're not far from Illinois. There's studies that show that 60 to 70% of dispensaries on the border in Michigan have clients or are essentially being funded by Hoosiers. Where do you stand on marijuana legalization in the state of Indiana?
Well, I've got to look at that from two perspectives. I'm a small business owner, and it's just like anything. I don't want to break into other areas of healthcare and stuff, but for some reason we get the cart before the horse. And legalization, if we look at Colorado Springs or any of the communities that did this and kind of just a knee-jerk reaction, the laws didn't keep up with the legalization of the marijuana, which I would absolutely not do currently. I would more like to see it decriminalized and give people the option to get things in order, maybe different ways to test THC, different ways to approach it on the job, and allow the communities to kind of build up the infrastructure that's needed. Because in Colorado Springs, we've seen more mental health issues, we've seen more physical health issues, and we've seen accidents and job site injuries increase, 2 or 3-fold. And so if we are not prepared for that, legalizing it is just going to create back problems that are going to cause other issues in our enforcement divisions and other things in our community. Now, is there a time and a place for it? I believe there's definitely a place for it. And as far as decriminalizing it, we got people sitting in jails that really shouldn't be there for the consumption issues that they have. And I think it costs the state a lot of money for those issues. So if you're asking me, am I specifically ready to legalize marijuana? No, but I'm ready to decriminalize it.
All right, we've got Jeff Larson here, candidate for Indiana State Senate District 4. Here's a question we received through our text line. What are your thoughts about more open public comment being allowed during local meetings? Currently, the state considers them business meetings and do not require public comment.
I've always struggled with the public versus the private discussions that happen. There's so many open door laws there to prevent things that go on behind closed doors. I know as a councilman, we had open public discussion at the end of every meeting, and there was no schedule. You didn't have to write in or even be present. We could read the questions. So I believe there's always an opportunity, and the public should have the right to speak. The only problem that I've seen in some meetings is that when we have a lot of public comment, sometimes it becomes more of an arguing piece than it is an actual discussion. And so I think if civility is in the room, then we can control those discussions, and I believe there should be more public discussion.
All right, we've got Jeff Larson here on the show. Today's Sound Off Republican candidate for Indiana State Senate District 4. If you've got a question, please do text me, 219-362-0522, or email me at soundoff@967theeagle.com. We're going to take our first break. You're going to listen to some political ads because we're full of them right now. And you're probably going to decide which candidate you want to support just based on those. So again, thank you so much for listening. We'll be back right after this on 96.7 The Eagle.
We, the people of LaPorte County, are proud to say that Sheila gets things done for all of us. As LaPorte County Commissioner, Sheila has worked on transforming the old Spartan warehouse in Westville into the Midwest Trade Center with 5 companies and 600 jobs, securing over $11 million in grants and private investment to provide better internet service to rural parts of LaPorte County, landing a $3 million state grant to achieve full rail connectivity at the Kingsbury Industrial Park, providing more new jobs and economic development. An essential financial lifeline to both businesses and families during the pandemic, with grants for small businesses and rental assistance for families struggling to pay rent. These are just a few examples of Sheila getting things done. Let's keep Commissioner Sheila Matias working hard for all of us. Cast your vote on November 8th for Sheila Matias for LaPorte County Commissioner.
Paid for by the committee to re-elect Sheila Matias.
The Melt Kitchen at the Vault is now open and serving lunch Wednesday through Saturday from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Located at 810 Lincoln Way across from the courthouse. Chef Eric and his staff are serving up some prepared-to-order, quick-service comfort food that will keep you coming back for more. Stop in today, 810 Lincoln Way in downtown LaPorte. Need to feed a crowd? The Melt Kitchen also offers catering and bulk ordering. Call 243-3331. That's 243-3331, or follow them on Facebook for more details.
My name is Ryan Seberg, and I am running for the LaPorte School Board. I am a proud husband, father, and business owner who is deeply invested in the LaPorte community. I want to give back to the school corporation that has given my family so much, creating safe, nurturing, and supportive schools that provide an optimal learning environment for our teachers and kids is my top priority. I bring proven leadership and a businessman's approach to the board. On November 8th, vote Seberg for LaPorte School Board.
Paid for by the committee to elect Ryan Seberg to school board.
Hi, this is Andy Heineck, candidate for LaPorte County Sheriff. As a military veteran and a 22-year member of the Sheriff's Office who has worked in every division, I believe I have the experience to be your next sheriff. My goals once elected are reduce recidivism amongst the inmates, expand our mental health services, and focus on the heroin epidemic. I've dedicated my life to serving our community, and I'm asking for your support. Please vote Andy Heineck for sheriff. Paid for by the committee to elect Heineck sheriff.
You wouldn't sign a contract without reading it. So why are our elections certified before we completely audit them? Currently, only 5 out of 92 counties get audited at the end of each election cycle, but the results don't get reported. I'm Jeff Maurer, and I'm running for Indiana Secretary of State. As your Secretary of State, I want you to have a receipt for your vote, an independent audit of all 92 counties, and impartial election results you can trust. I will champion Hoosier small businesses so our entrepreneurs can build their dreams and feed their families. Hoosiers deserve a Secretary of State they can count on. This November, vote for me, Jeff Maurer, for Secretary of State. Call or text me at 317-721-6438 or visit MaurerForIndiana.com. I'm Jeff Maurer, and I approve this message. This announcement paid for by Maurer for Indiana.
Michiana weather. 76 this afternoon under mainly cloudy skies. Winds out of the south, 15 to 20 miles per hour. Cloudy tonight, 58. From the Weather Center at HometownNewsNow.com. I'm meteorologist Paul Trombley. Right now, 72.
We're waiting to hear from you. Dial or text 362-0522 and let us know what you think. That's 362-0522. Back to Sound Off on 96.7 The Eagle.
Welcome back, friends. Good to have you with us on the second segment of our Sound Off today. We've got Republican candidate for Indiana State Senate District 4, Jeff Larson, on the show. If you have a question, please don't call, but you can text 219-362-0522. If you're streaming with us online, YouTube or Facebook, you're welcome to put your comments in there, and I'd be happy to ask those questions as well. Again, it's important to know a little bit more about who's on your ballot and what they stand for, so you can decide whether or not you think it's a worthy vote for you. Because again, in the entire democratic process we have, your vote counts, and so hopefully, again, you'll exercise it wisely. All right, Jeff, good to have you on the show. A couple more questions we've received. As a former union member, do you support reworking the right to work legislation in Indiana that has hurt the labor unions and regular blue-collar Hoosiers significantly?
Well, I've worked on a UBO in Porter County. It was the first one enacted. Jeremy Rivas and myself were both union guys. Jeremy was a BA for the Masons. And I think there's a lot of communities that are taking the initiative to protect those job sites where we need a really skilled labor or workforce. And so there are issues with the right to work law that should cover public works projects where we need a solid, well-trained force. And so, yeah, I'd be willing to investigate that and go back in and see where we are in that, especially since my background is in labor and unions. The question is do we have enough people, and are we feeding those systems well enough? And that's something that the schools could help answer, and also the unions themselves. We could definitely use more people involved in those fields. And I think the reason we're reaching outside the state to get labor here is because there is such a massive labor shortage in skilled and professional labor.
All right. Here's a question for you. Sorry, sometimes I have to interpret. Okay. Do you support LGBTQ Hoosiers being a protected class under anti-discrimination laws? Now, you probably know this, that Senator Mike Bohacik worked on anti-discrimination legislation that was included originally in his legislation but then got stripped away. Right. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I feel that everyone should have the right to be protected in the state of Indiana, and there are issues that are facing us currently in those communities that are probably a direct violation of some of their rights. And so, yeah, I think we should definitely go back. I'd be willing to work with Mike on the legislation that he'd put together before to try and make that work. We've worked kind of closely during this campaign, enjoyed his thoughts. And I know how passionate he is about people in those situations, especially people with disabilities, even, that he is stressed very importantly how involved he is. So I would definitely say, yes, I'd be willing to revisit that.
All right. So if you were elected in the first 100 days or in the first session that you would have, what would be some of your priorities?
Well, first would be probably and foremost would be education. I'm passionate with that, and I know there's some issues. Abortion comes to mind immediately that I would like to revisit. There's some things along that route, and safety in our communities. I think we have a definite issue, a shortage of fire and police manpower, and so those are going to be some components. Beyond that, there are several things that would come to mind, and one of them would be housing for a lot of people in the communities that I'm associated with. We have some housing shortages. I'd like to address those issues, and maybe look at our financing to see where we are and if we can't return some of that money to the citizens of the state.
All right. We did have a question here about abortion. It's been a topic we've talked about significantly on this show. And obviously we have, like the rest of the state, listeners on both sides. And sometimes it's not even a both sides. It's 100 sides of this thing here. For our listeners that, again, might not remember, after Roe v. Wade was, the Supreme Court struck that down, Indiana was the first state to pass new legislation for abortion, which some would argue is an outright abortion restriction, but there are still some allowances, but I think up to maybe 10 to 12 weeks. Now, do you believe the new abortion laws, this is the question that you received, do you believe the new abortion laws are too strict? And would you support maybe moving them back to 18 to 20 weeks?
Well, I'm not a medical doctor, and having to comment on something like that without that being my profession is difficult. I have a personal belief in that, and I'd like to share a story that I had with my conversation I had with my daughter to probably help answer that. In my life, I've come to know Christ when I was like 26 years old, and one verse always sticks out in my mind is about judging others. And so I had this conversation with my daughter after Roe v. Wade, and it was a very difficult discussion, but it was one that needed to be had. And she said, "Dad, what if I have done everything right in my life and have taken care of myself and prevented myself by having birth control, and I've talked to my boyfriend about it, and we decide to have intercourse, and we go through 3-4 weeks together, nothing's changed, and then I realize I don't start my period. What options do I have in the state of Indiana, and where would I go to kind of resolve those issues or get help with those issues?" And like I said earlier, we've kind of put the cart before the horse. We don't have in place a lot of help for individuals that are pregnant. We don't have a lot of programs that address those issues. There's a lack in a lot of our local communities. And of course, her having me to discuss that with is probably a huge help, but there's going to be many women and people that will not have that opportunity to discuss. And so I think we have to look at that and weigh that into our decisions. I don't think we've done that currently. I think we were kind of in a hurry to make a judgment call, and I think that's wrong. I don't think legislators should be making decisions for people in those positions just based on my Christian belief.
All right. If you have a question for Jeff Larson, Republican candidate for Indiana State Senate District 4, you're welcome to text me at 219-362-0522. You can also email me at soundoff@967theeagle.com. And if you ever miss an episode, you can go to hometownnewsnow.com and listen to past episodes of Sound Off, listen to other episodes of candidates, maybe even Friday's episode, last Friday's, with Mayor Tom Dermody and Dennis Siddell. The JV team got brought in for a day. But again, Indiana is touting that, again, for the 12th straight month, unemployment is 3% or lower, which is pretty remarkable, quite frankly. But there are many businesses here in LaPorte as well who are having a hard time finding employees. Right. How do we live with the both of that? Unemployment's really low, under 3%, which is really, 10 years ago would have been just unthinkable for 12 months under 3%. How can these businesses here in Indiana get more employees?
Well, I think there's a couple things. Why aren't people moving here for employment? And the other question is how are we educating kids to train them for those employment opportunities? And I think we have had some really good success with some of these CTE programs, But I think the majority of it is that we're not reaching kids early enough through the educational process. And we talked about that when I was teaching building trades, that we would like to have a feeder program maybe as early as 6th or 7th grade, where we went back and talked to these kids about, hey, what career opportunities are available to you? How can we interest you in these programs and get you involved? And the other thing is retention has always been a problem in Indiana, because we've kind of lagged behind on some of our wages. So maybe we need to look at we've done a lot of wage studies. We did one when I was on the county. We actually just completed one after I left the council. We initiated that while I was on there. The city of Valpo did one, and we're trying to align those wages with other communities in like size. And I think that's what needs to be done across the state. I think we need to look at all of the wages across the state and find out where we are. I know there's some issues, like we may be number 3 or number 5 in growth in business, but we're like number 49 in healthcare in the country currently. And I think that's also somewhere where we need to look in wage-wise. I don't know where we are currently. I thought I saw a statistic like we are 33 or 35 out of all the states. And so that's something we should probably address. Our growth is humongous, where businesses are invested in these communities, but we just can't retain the people.
All right. We've got candidate Jeff Larson, who's running for as the Republican in Indiana District 4 for State Senate. If you have a question for him, you can text 219-362-0522 or don't call me, but you can email me at soundoff@967legal.com. All right, here's a question we would get for a lot of our statewide candidates. Where do you stand on the Second Amendment? Will you work to continue to give more rights to Hoosiers when it comes to gun laws and rights? We shouldn't have what we can own limited by the government. Obviously, it was a controversial bill, but a lot of, including our own sheriff and law enforcement agents here in LaPorte County, didn't love the idea that you no longer had to permit handguns. Indiana, now you don't have to permit them if you're 18 or above. Where do you stand on some of these things? Are you a supporter of the Second Amendment? And I think the second part of that question that I received is, do you believe in giving more rights to those, gun owners so they can continue to own different types of weapons?
Well, I'm a avid, gun owner myself. I was a reserve officer for the town of Chesterton. I think it's a twofold question. Gun ownership should come with some responsibility. That's the correct training and use of a firearm. I think I grew up, I had my first shotgun at 6. My dad took me out and spent hours and hours with me, teaching me how to use the weapon proficiently. And I think owning a gun is a huge responsibility. As an officer, you're trained to never put your finger on the trigger, because if you do, you have to be willing to take someone's life. That's not a second question. You don't shoot to hurt them, you shoot to kill them. And so with every aspect of gun ownership, that should be the thought process. This weapon is entirely intended to kill something. And so with that mindset, you have to be 100% positive as to why we're using the weapon, why we possess it, and is it our right to own it. Now, do I believe in the 2A? Absolutely. Do I believe that we should be restricted on ownership? No, because I think if you're a responsible owner, you do the right things, then we won't have issues like we see across the country. I think what's happened is we've given a society a weapon and not taught them the responsibility that comes with it, and that's why we're seeing so many of these murders across the country.
And conversely, we've had this question in previous episodes as well, given to statewide candidates. In Indiana, I think you can be an educator that carries a gun as long as you've got the right licensing and stuff like that. Do you think the state government should encourage more educators to carry guns in schools?
I don't think that an educator is equipped to take a child's life. I think an educator is there to protect the child. I think if we were to do anything to create more SROs, I would like to see us get our vets that are currently either not working or somewhat not involved in our communities and retrain them and use them in our schools. I think they're a huge asset, and vets all across the state of Indiana I've talked with. And I think a lot of them would be willing to take that role on. They could share their stories and the wars that they've had. They'd have a great tagline to work with students, and they'd be a super valuable asset in an educational field. Asking the teachers to do something that goes against every grain they've ever had to do, is almost impossible. I can't imagine. I have a little bit of a law enforcement background and understand the responsibility, but without that, there was no way I would want to take a child's life.
All right, we've got Jeff Larson, candidate for Indiana State Senate District 4 on the show today. You're welcome to text me 219-362-0522 or email me at soundoff@967theeagle.com if you have a question. We're going to take our final break of the day and get back to some more questions after this. Keep listening to 96.7 The Eagle.
Hi, friends. Chief Deputy Ron Heeg here, and your Republican candidate for LaPorte County Sheriff. I'm a 25-year veteran of the Sheriff's Office, starting my career within the jail, working my way through the ranks to my current role of having the honor to serve as Sheriff Boyd's Chief Deputy. My campaign consists of 3 strategic goals: public safety, personnel investment, and community investment. I'm married to my wife, Heather, and we live in Kankakee Township with our daughters, Olivia and Allison. I humbly ask for your vote honored before November 8th. Paid for by Heeg for Sheriff.
Diego Morales is living the American dream, a dream of freedom and opportunity that inspired him and his family to move to the United States more than 2 decades ago. Diego has served in the military, and he's worked in both the public and private sectors. Diego supports strong Hoosier values, and he's been a true conservative throughout his life. As your next Secretary of State, Diego Morales is committed to keeping our elections safe and secure. He will work with federal partners to push back against federal bureaucrats taking over Hoosier elections. He will work to protect and expand photo ID laws. Diego Morales will be committed to make sure in Indiana elections it will be easy to vote and harder to cheat.
I'm Diego Morales, and I approve this message because America has been good to me, and I'm ready to give back. Protecting the American dream starts at the ballot box, and it's time to make the American dream a reality for all Hoosiers. Please vote for me, Diego Morales, for Secretary of State.
Paid for by Diego for Indiana.
Keep your floors scratch-free and looking their best with help from Menards. Shepherd Hardware is known as a recognized leader in floor protection. Menards carries a great selection of caster wheels, furniture sliders, and more protective products. Defend your floors against damage today with 11% off all floor protection products from Shepherd Hardware. Good through October 30th. Savings are a mail-in rebate. Some exclusions apply. See store for details.
Save big money at Menards.
This is Randy Novak. I respectfully ask for your vote for LaPorte County Council. I will work hard with an informed, common sense approach to provide the highest level of service at the lowest possible cost to the taxpayers. Quality of life starts with local government, and experience does matter. I have professional experience specific to public services and managing their multi-million-dollar budgets. I take each issue into careful consideration and work in a bipartisan way to find the best solution. I need your support to keep a positive, common sense approach to county government. Vote Randy Novak for LaPorte County Council District 2.
Hi, I'm Connie Grammarosa, and I'm running for commissioner because I care about our county. As a current council member, I've questioned the large expenditures that go through as emergency purchases when indeed they should be routine maintenance. While making financial decisions, I put you, the taxpayer, first. My opponent used your tax dollars to install mute buttons in the commissioner's meeting room to mute you, the taxpayer. I will make a motion to have them removed. I will strongly advise that we have public comment not only at the beginning of meetings but at the end, giving you the opportunity to voice your opinion. One of the commissioner's duties as CEO is to oversee the day-to-day operations. Some will argue it's a part-time position. I pledge to be a full-time commissioner. I'm Connie Grammarosa, and I'm asking for your vote on or before November 8th. I'm Connie Grammarosa, and I approve this message.
Vote Fagan 2022. Who is Sean Fagan? He's a lawyer. He's a Republican. Sean Fagan, running for LaPorte County Prosecutor 2022. Sean Fagan knows that LaPorte County is a great place to live, and he wants to keep it that way. Sean Fagan for LaPorte County Prosecutor 2022. Be safe. Be strong. Let's work together. Vote Sean Fagan 2022. This message paid for by Fagan for Prosecutor.
Your opinion matters. We invite you to share it by calling or texting the Liquor Ball on-air line at 362-0522. That's 362-0522. Now, back to Sound Off on 96.7 The Eagle.
Welcome back to our final segment of Sound Off. Good to have you with us on the show today. On Friday's episode, we've got Indiana Secretary of State candidate, Democrat Destiny Wells on the show. We've got a couple more shows before the election in 2 weeks, and we'll try to make them as good as we can so that you know who's on your ballot and whether or not you want to support them or not. Today on Sound Off, we've got Jeff Larson, who's a candidate for Indiana State Senate District 4. If you have a question, you're welcome to text me 219-362-0522 or email me at soundoff@967theeagle.com. Here's a question we received, Jeff. Do you think full-time elected local politicians should be state mandated to be in the office every day and not work another job and show up just occasionally? You were a council member, right?
That's a great question. And when I ran for office, it was funny. One of my opponents said it was a part-time job. And, I thought about that before I responded, and I said, the job is as many hours as you want to put into it. You're elected by your citizenry, and you think to yourself, how much involvement is this going to take? And sometimes I'd put 54, 60 hours worth of work in a week, and then other times you'd get maybe 30 or less hours in. So I think the flexibility, being in that elected office, is more demanding than most people think. I think a lot of times your elected officials, you feel like you're not getting your money's worth out of them, but there's an awful lot that they do off screen that you don't see, that it probably affects how many hours they're actually getting in. I mean, we were in meetings nonstop, and you got calls from constituents at all hours of the night, so it wasn't like you weren't involved in the process. Do I think they need to sit in an office? No, because I don't think that really gets the potential of what people are asking them to do if they're just sitting behind a desk somewhere. I think they need to be out amongst the people. I think that would be a bad situation, and probably not as productive as it currently is. Now, do I think that a lot of them, or some of them, get away with not putting any time in? Absolutely, and I served with some that were like that weren't really devoted to the job and just ran to be in an elected office, and that is really not the kind of people we want in service. But I think there's a happy medium there between being in the office, being accessible. When I came on the council, we had 2 days a week that we were actually in the office, which worked out extremely well. A lot of people came in and were able to talk to us, see us, greet us one-on-one, and we were able to answer questions for them on the spot instead of having to get back to them, and that was very helpful. And I think that a lot of elected officials should try to strive to be in their offices.
All right, a question for you, and I'm going to broaden this question a little bit. This is specifically about Michigan State, but there's a lot going on. I know there's an ongoing conversation with Indianapolis, crime and gun violence, these kind of things. There's been ongoing conversations about rising crime and gun violence in Michigan City. These questions. What can the legislator do to help these areas, these pockets of Indiana that are dealing with rising crime and gun violence?
Well, I think there's several things we can do. We've got, first, we can reach out to the local politicians and find out why these things are occurring, because usually there's some reason, there's some growth in the community or a negative aspect to the community that's creating this. The other thing is we have state police resources, as we saw in Gary. We had the state police come in and start auditing what was going on in the cities, and those things aren't really liked by the local politicians or the local police force, but sometimes they're a necessity because the violence is getting so far out of hand. Michigan City's got a unique problem. There's growth going on there, and there's also issues in the community of lack of funds, lack of resources. So I think as a legislator, I think we look at the overall picture. Are the city needs being met? Are there enough funds to create opportunities for the people that live there? And that kind of relates to the question we had earlier about employment. I'm sure there's a lot of employable people in that community, but they don't currently have access to the education or the transportation they need to get to those jobs. So I think there's a lot of things going on there that the state legislator can do. I think if he's involved in the community, he would know firsthand, and that's one of the reasons I opened an office over there in Michigan City, was so that I could feel the kind of the vibe and the background of the city and understand what was needed over there.
All right, here's a question about mental health care. The state recently had, I think just this last weekend, a mental health care summit with all of the branches of government. They brought in as many local politicians. I know, I think I saw on our Facebook page or on different things that I think Lisa Pierzakowski, our Center Township trustee, and some other leaders were there as well. Eric Holcomb talked about at that meeting there needs to be a better statewide approach for mental health care in Indiana, and it's going to cost money. We talk a lot about gun violence or school violence being a mental health care issue, these kind of things. But oftentimes that's where the conversation stops because we're not investing into mental health care. Would you support on a statewide level mental health care legislation that can kind of bleed down into the counties and communities so that, again, more people can have better access, especially rural counties, but also here in LaPorte County?
I absolutely would. And we investigated that when I was on the council, and we could see this crisis coming because COVID just exacerbated the problem. You could tell people were isolated. There was a lot of things that were going on. I mean, even teenagers, they all need socialization. They don't function well when they're in a tight homebound environment. And so I think in the next 5 to 7 years, we're going to see some serious results from all that isolation, and it's going to translate into a lot more health issue problems in our communities. And I know currently Ed Charbonneau, State Senator Charbonneau, is working on a health package that's going to be about $240 to $250 million. And that's definitely going to help some of the mental health issues that we're facing. There's some levy changes that we can make in our currently in our communities. A lot of people don't understand that there's a levy cap on communities on total taxing, that a certain amount of that has to go to mental health. We can change that levy. We can increase that to allow more funds into the communities, but it's definitely going to have to happen. I could see where schools are going to need more counseling staff. We're going to have a lot of issues that we're going to face in the next 5 to 7 years. And so, yeah, I'm in favor of increasing that health care for sure, and especially mental health.
All right. Again, good to have you on the show. I'm going to give you the final word. What would you like our listeners to know?
Well, I'd just like them to know that I'm a no-nonsense, common-sense approach guy. I don't believe in big government. I think there's a lot of things that have happened in our state that are good, but there's a ton of things that need improvement. I think I'm right for this position because I've put my time in other occupations and in other positions that relate to the job, and I think I've already built a good camaraderie of people that are in state legislature. I would like to say that I'd like to look at some term limits stuff in our state, because I think currently and federally, I'd like to see some of the states reach out and say, hey, we've got to start controlling some of these individuals that stay in these seats forever. And so there's some issues that I like addressed that we didn't even talk about. But I think overall, I think I am a good fit for that candidacy, and all I can ask is get people out and please come out and vote. It's your right, and it's probably one of the most important rights you have.
All right. Well, it's good to have you again, running against Rodney Pohl Jr., the Democratic incumbent, who was on the show last week. If you want to listen to this episode, go to hometownnewsnow.com or find the Sound Off Radio Show podcast, wherever fine podcasts are found, and you can, again, listen to that as well. Jeff, it's been a pleasure, a joy to get to know you. I appreciate you so much being on the show. Again, all of the news, all of the coverage for elections is on hometownnewsnow.com. I encourage you to go there. You can find different, election stories, but also what's going on here. Liam Hobbs and Stan Maddox not only report on the radio, but also try to keep you up to date on news on our hometownnewsnow.com. On Friday's show, Destiny Wells will be here. We've got Jeff Marar coming up as well, who's the Libertarian candidate for Secretary of State. Still trying to get Diego Morales booked as well. Hopefully he'll come on. And again, all of the Secretary of State candidates that are on your ballot will be able to be on here so that you can listen to them and maybe ask a question about election stuff. Secretary of State is obviously a conversation and a candidacy that many around the country are worried about and want to know more about. So hopefully Diego Morales will come on as well. Again, thank you so much for listening to the show. Thanks for supporting us. We'll be back on Friday with another episode. Be good to yourself. Be good to others. Keep listening to 96.7 The Eagle.
Thank you for joining us and voicing your opinion on this edition of Sound Off. The views on Sound Off are those of the host or callers and do not represent the opinion of 96.7 The Eagle, Spoon River Media LLC, or the sponsors. Sound Off airs every Monday and Friday at 12:30. Please mark your calendar and join us again for the next edition of Sound Off on 96.7 The Eagle.
Hi, this is Chris Stapleton.
Hi, this is Kane Brown.
Hey, this is Luke Combs. This is...
Your home for country music variety is 96.7 The Eagle, WCOE FM LaPorte.
Michiana weather.